Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for our program, DBT Skills in Coping with Cancer. My name is Alicia, and I am the Assistant Program Manager at SHARE. I'd like to begin our program by first introducing our speaker. Elizabeth Cohn Stuntz, LCSW, a psychotherapist in private practice in Mamaroneck, New York, is a cancer survivor and a Zen student. After many years of involvement with services for people with cancer and their loved ones, she developed a program of coping skills based on dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. She serves on the faculty of the Westchester Center for Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. Her newest book is called Coping with Cancer, DBT Skills to Manage Your Emotions and Balance Uncertainty with Hope.
Thanks so much. So happy to be here with all of you. I'm also a breast cancer survivor. I was first diagnosed in 19 years ago and have had chemo, and bilateral mastectomy, oophorectomy. I'm also a BRCA positive person. So that's my journey. And today I want to talk to you about some skills for coping with cancer that are based on a book, and we can put up the first slide. Yeah. Wait a second. Hang on a second, because I lost. Wait a minute. When you do that, I lost my notes. Hang on a second. Okay. Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Sorry about that. Based on a book that I have co-authored with Marsha Linehan. Marsha Linehan is the person who has developed what's called dialectical behavior therapy, and that's what DBT stands for. She was actually named by Time magazine as one of the geniuses and the visionaries whose work has transformed our world. And it's quite amazing because almost everybody else on that list is like Freud and Copernicus and Galileo, people who aren't even alive and are great masters. So why is Linehan on that list? Because her coping skills have been really carefully researched, not yet with cancer, but in all kinds of challenging situations. And they have been proven effective to help people become more resilient and create a meaningful life. Linehan is actually a Zen master. And the skills that I'm going to be talking to you about tonight are practical translations of the wisdom of Zen that are now being validated by neuroscience. And the framework that Linehan and I developed was adapted from dialectical behavior therapy, and I'll keep referring to that as DBT, and are informed by neuroscience. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking to you about have been shown in neuroscience, and the wisdom of Zen and my own psychoanalytic background. So we can go to the next slide. DBT was originally developed for people in such despair that they felt suicidal. Now the usage of the skills that we're going to be talking about has been found to be helpful in all kinds of challenging situations for substance abuse. It's used now with adolescents. It's used now in normal development and taught in schools. And the skills actually can be useful to all of us. And many people respond to cancer with feelings of helplessness and a sense of out of control. And knowing what you can do to manage your emotions and how to make effective decisions, talk to other people, and find sources of comfort has been shown to be very helpful to people. All the strategies that I'm going to talk to you about tonight are presented as options. not everything is effective for all people. And you're really the expert about what strategies are going to be useful. And I also want to say that all the skills that I'm talking about, I will tell you about, but some of them require practice for mastery. And we have developed a larger curriculum. I'm giving you an hour or 45-minute overview, but when we teach them to people, we usually do them in longer blocks to give people a chance to practice them. But I want to give you a sense of what's involved. So let's look at the next slide. Nobody here needs me to say that cancer can be a stressful and uncertain time. Some people talk about it as being struck by a lightning bolt. We're facing circumstances that we may have never anticipated and never chosen. Much has changed in our lives, and life can be way less predictable. And we don't like what we can't know and control. And many of us feel more off balance, feeling more stressed, on edge, or vulnerable. So let's look at the next slide. So some of the common concerns that we hear about and that I'm going to be talking about are making major decisions. It can be very hard to digest and take
Sorry,
in.
Liz. I'm just having a little bit of trouble doing the slides. It seems like I can't do the slides and share my screen at the same time. So let me just see how I can manage that. 1 second. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So we're on the slide. That's a picture. It's the 4th slide, common concerns.
Got it. Okay. 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
No worries.
Yeah, no worries, because yeah, a couple of people text me that they were only seeing half of the slide.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me see. This is gonna work now.
put it. Yeah. Okay. The 4th, keep going. We'll go back one more. That one, that common concerns. That's the slide.
Okay, perfect. I think, can everyone see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think we should
Okay.
be good for now.
Okay. So the 4 areas I'm going to be talking about are facing major decisions. And as I was saying, it can be very hard to digest and take in lots of upsetting new information. Regulating emotions we'll be going into, because many of us and those around us are feeling more, maybe feeling more fear, anxiety, sadness, or anger than usual. And we worry about our relationships. Perhaps we're not able to work or connect with other people in usual ways. And actually in the book, we go into relationships both with friends, family and friends, but we also have a whole section where we go into things about dealing with our colleagues, people at work, or people that we're volunteering with, and communicating with our medical providers. And also this last one about living meaningfully, that sometimes we can feel burned out and looking for ways of finding sources of deeper meaning and comfort. That people want help in finding and holding connection to what's most meaningful and supportive to them. So let's look at this next slide. Can you move to the next one? Yeah. One more. That's it. Okay. So however we're responding is understandable. We have a wide spectrum of coping skills. Some of us are very conscious of our own reactions. Others of us are not tuned in at all. Our genes and previous emotional and medical difficulties can shape our particular style. Some of us are more or less comfortable with the changes that have happened. Some of us tend to be on that emotional end of that spectrum. We may focus more on the feelings than the facts and emphasize the threats and may be more vulnerable to panic. And others of us may be on that restrained end and be more controlled and put a brake on our feelings, perhaps minimizing the danger or quality of life concerns or the fullness of life. And really our goal here is to help us all be kinder and less critical of ourselves by honoring and accepting our feelings and priorities and finding ways to dial down reactions that are more powerful than in our own interest. So let's move to this next slide. Great. So let me talk to you a little bit about a framework to understand how we cope. Our reactions to cancer are affected by these four things: our emotions, which impact our physical response, which impact our thoughts, which then affect our actions. And those things all are simultaneously influencing each other. Think about it. A doctor calls and says, oh, I found a mass and we need an additional scan. What might the emotions be? Perhaps it's panic, perhaps it's fear, perhaps it's helplessness. What happens physically then? We may get a rapid heart rate. We might get tense muscles. What kind of thoughts come in? This is so overwhelming. What am I going to do? Why did he say it was a mass? Does he really know that's the truth? What actions? What are the impulses to actions? I need a drink. What am I going to, do I need a different doctor? Is he insensitive? Then that gets us more stressed and intensifies the anger, and the emotions and the thoughts and the physical responses and the actions can go round and round and round like that. So let's look at this next slide about a useful stress response. Thanks, Alicia. I think we're on the same page here. When we're in immediate danger, our emotions and our physical body and our thoughts and our actions work together. Our body was designed that way. Think about the caveman when he was facing a lion, and his heart rate would increase, and there would be a stress response, and muscles would tighten, and then he would run. And after the lion leaves, ideally the stress response sets down to a balanced calm. But let's look at this next slide. We're not the cavemen anymore, and we're dealing with a lion that is still there. The danger doesn't always pass immediately when we have cancer. We can remain worried, and we don't always reset our body and our thoughts and our emotions to that balanced calm. So the difference between fear and anxiety are very important to understand here. Both fear and anxiety have the same bodily responses. When we're frightened and we're anxious, our heart rate increases. We're a bundle of tight nerves trying to defend our existence to mobilize protective action. But with fear, it's like the lion is in front of us right now. It's a present danger at this moment. With anxiety, the danger is not immediate. It's something that might happen in the future. So we have repetitive worried thoughts about something that might happen, and the action that we're tending to take might be necessary and it might be unnecessary. So let's go to this next slide about the ongoing stress response. Neuroscience has taught us that we are physiologically predisposed to be anxious. The mind has a biological bias towards our negative thoughts. Think about that. The caveman could not afford to mistake the threat of a venomous snake for a stick. So his mind was predisposed to see anything shaped like a snake, believing that he needed to take action. So when the body believes that there's an ongoing threat, there's this terrible thing, the stress response is maintained, and there's chronic physical tension that's armor to prepare us to fight. When we're bathed in stress like that, our nervous system can get overloaded, sending a continuous, uh-oh, danger, flight message to either fight or take flight or freeze. The continuing frightening thoughts that we can have and the stressful bodily reaction can set off a vicious cycle, almost like a gas pedal being stuck down. So the more anxious we are, the more distressed we can become, the more distressed we feel, the more things we start to think about and worry about. And the more frightened and anxious we feel, the more stressed our body remains. All this stress can make it harder for us to think clearly. So let's go to this next slide. What can we do here? The overwhelming situation is similar to what happens when an electrical circuit gets overloaded, when the circuit breaker shuts off all the electricity and everything stops working. So with the electrical circuit, what we do is we look at the circuit breaker to try and understand what triggered the problem. We're going to use that same approach here because we're going to teach you to take the time to look at all the factors that can be overloading our coping circuit to figure out what might be straining our capacity to cope. Let's move to the next slide. The coping circuit may have been blown by unpredictable changes. The fact is, change is always happening. Whether we like it or not, change is actually an inevitable part of life. Life and our reactions change constantly and ebb and flow like the constant motion of this moving seesaw here. Consider this. In the morning, a bright sun rises, we might be pleased. Later, clouds may cast a shadow. We might not like that we've lost the sun. Dark clouds may arise, and we may forget the sun even exists, and perhaps our mood matches the darkness. Later, the sun may reappear, and we may feel hopeful again. And at the end of the day, and the sun goes down, it may be dark again. We don't always have control over the changes in life that may throw us off balance, but we can take control by deciding how to respond. And our initial response may be understandable or useful, but it may not always be useful over time. So the key to this coping framework and the skills is about balance. Effective coping is about recognizing what's happened and how we're responding, and then choosing to balance any reactions that aren't in our interest by using our body to send productive messages, dialing down emotions that may be more intense than are useful, checking thoughts to make sure they're accurate and take a full perspective of the situation, and taking productive actions. So let's move to the next slide. I'm going to break that down for you much more. In a perfect world, we respond proactively to what's happening while staying calm. That's a perfect world, and none of us lives in a perfect world. In a perfect world, we include both emotional and factual considerations, and we balance the extremes of opposite perspectives. My co-author, Marsha, gives that balanced middle place between our emotions and our facts. She calls it our wise mind. It's the intuitive sense that we all know what to be true. And the truth is, we all have a wise mind. It's a part of all of us, including you. And it's easy to doubt our feelings and our choices and assume other people have this capacity for wisdom and we don't. Wisdom, this wise mind, is not always easy to find, but when we do this full training curriculum, we teach people ways to dig down and find it. It's really important to keep in mind that this wise mind balance center of the seesaw is an ideal. None of us is in wise mind all the time, but with practice, our balance improves. So we're looking to be closer to this middle, knowing that we're going to go back and forth between the different sides. So let me break this down a little more with an acronym called STOP. Let's move to the next slide. Effective coping in challenging times involves slowing down to notice what's happening and our reactions, and then rebalancing our response with changes to our body, our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. And I put up this acronym of STOP as a useful framework. Let me break it down for you. So we'll go to the next slide, the S. In stressful situations, we can tend to react to things on autopilot. We may respond to an urge to act that may or may not be in our interests without taking time to think about it. So in an ideal world, we wanted the S of STOP is to stop, freeze, to take notice that we are overwhelmed, that we're feeling off balance, and that we have an urgency to respond, but we want to notice that without immediately taking action. So let's go to the next slide, the T. The T is to take, to take a step back, to pause. Even though the storm may not have stopped, we want to take the time to slow down and to take a time to see what's happened and how we're reaction to help us begin to settle in a more balanced place. The truth is, our wise mind best decisions are made when we can allow ourselves to calm down after the upset. One of the best ways to take a step back is to take a deep breath, because we want to quiet our body, which helps to quiet our mind, so that when we take the step back, we focus on each breath and we may inhale more deeply than usual to a count of 4. Let's say, take an inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the key here is to take a longer exhale. That's going to exhale to a count of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we want to do that for a cycle of 4 breaths, 4 cycles of inhaling to 4 and exhaling for 6. That's going to slow down our heart rate. Now, again, this is one of the things that you're going to have to learn to practice so that we have the skill ready when we notice that our heart is pounding and that we're very stressed. But the key here is a longer exhale. Okay, let's go to the O. The O is about observing and identifying everything that's happening, both inside of us and outside of us. Think about that coping circuit. To reset the coping circuit, we need to look at the whole circuit board, taking stock of everything that impacts the situation. So we know what changes have blown our fuse so we can decide what to do about it. Now, I'm going to take a bit more time on the O of observing, because observing isn't as easy as it seems. Even when we're not stressed and upset, it's very easy to overlook crucial information. When I do a longer presentation of this, I use a selective attention video where I tell people to count the amount of basketballs that are being passed between people. And when people are watching it, they're so busy counting that they don't notice in this video that a gorilla walks through the middle of it. When we're paying attention to one part of what's happening, we can miss something as outrageous as a gorilla walking in front of us. Actually, my mother, when I was a young woman, had cancer, and she had a very difficult surgery. And I always tell the story that there were 9 of us in the room when the surgeon came in to talk about the results. And we all heard different parts of the story. Some of us focused on the factual numbers and percentages for the medical providers, and we didn't pay attention to the feelings, and we may have minimized the quality of life concerns or how it was going to affect relationships. And others of us focused on the feelings, stressing only the threats and minimized the facts. And effective decisions really mean looking at the whole picture, considering both the objective facts that are there to guide and not rule our choices, and our subjective intuition. I'm going to move to the next slide. The problem with fully observing with cancer is that it also means paying attention to things that we don't like, unpleasant truths. Who wants to feel uncomfortable or face unwelcome physical or emotional challenges? Sometimes we act like the best way to fight cancer is to push away painful facts and painful feelings. Faced with cancer, sometimes we can, some of us respond like defensive teenagers, rebelling against what's happening, not wanting to acknowledge uncomfortable reactions. Actually, like me, we may prefer to focus on what we hope is true. Initially, when I was diagnosed, I had already worked in cancer support for a long time, and I decided that I tried to prove to myself and the world that I was facing and coping with my cancer. I was going to be strong and I was going to fight this disease. I chose the most aggressive treatment options, and I wanted to believe cancer didn't have to impact my life. I was going to work the same as always. I was going to schedule the chemo around my teaching. I actually taught till 10 p.m. the night before a major surgery. I was a fighter. I wasn't going to surrender. And I had this idea I wasn't going to be needy, scared, or vulnerable. The morning of my surgery, I was facing a 12-hour surgery. And remember, I worked till 10 the night before. Some of the feelings and wishes I wanted to push aside showed up anyway. They always do. My sister had offered to be at the hospital, and I said, no, not necessary. But finally facing my feelings about the reality of the surgery, I felt less steady and really wanted my sister with me. Luckily, I finally respected the message to reach out for support. And blessedly, even though my sister was 3 hours away, she came. Turns out I'm not the first or last person who didn't see the difference between fighting cancer and facing its physical and emotional challenges. Of course, we want to fight cancer. Fighting for our health is natural and productive. But like many others, I believe the myth that I should fight cancer and my natural reactions, or I would be passively giving in to the disease. I didn't want to acknowledge any worries about coping, but we can't deal with issues we haven't acknowledged. To effectively fight for our health and change cancer's impact, we need to face what's happening and its effect on us. I later realized I had to stop fighting my feelings to let myself know I wanted my sister with me. So let's turn to this next slide. I'm still on the O of observing, because what are the parts we want to observe? That we want to observe as fully and accurately as possible. And it's very useful to start with observing our body. our physical responses are actually the most reliable sources of accurate information. Our bodily sensations offer signs about a potential threat, so we can see if action is needed. So we want to look at how rapidly is our heart beating? What's the rate of our breath? Are our muscles all tight? Do we have tingling in our head, throat, chest, or belly? What does our posture look like? Are there changes in our digestion? What's our body temperature? And the goal is really to pay attention, which is what we call mindfulness. Mindfulness is really to pay attention to what's happening right now, not something we felt in the past or something in the future, and doing our best to focus on the physical sensations and not focusing on the inevitable thoughts that are going to arise, but when those thoughts come up, to keep our focus on the bodily sensations. And indeed, focusing in this way, paying attention in this way, has proven for cancer patients, has been researched that helps cancer patients lessen depression, decrease stress and anxiety, minimize difficulties with sleep and fatigue, and improve quality of life, including one's own empathy and compassion. And that's why, while I'm giving you an overview, the actual training of this takes longer, is a much more extensive thing because it teaches you to pay attention in that way. So what else do we want to pay attention to? What else is in that O of observe? Let's go to the next slide, because we also want to observe our thoughts. Remember, our coping circuit is our body, our thoughts, our emotions, and actions. So observe it. Let's stay here with observing thoughts. The goal here is to notice what we're thinking from moment to moment, paying attention that our mind inevitably wanders from what's happening right now. And we are aware of thoughts of, oh my goodness, what happened in the past, and particularly our worries about what's going to happen in the future. Observing our thoughts is different than choosing to think about something right now or trying to avoid thoughts. The goal is to let those thoughts come and then let them pass by as if they're on a conveyor belt, because we're inevitably going to think about things in the future or the past and not just think about the thoughts. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is more about observing thoughts, because our thoughts are not always accurate and they don't always consider the full story. We can make all kinds of assumptions that are based on partial and inconsistent information. And without proven facts, it's easy to think we know something is true, even though some facts are unknowable, like what's going to happen in the future. And it's important to distinguish our opinions and our biases from actual facts. Opinions and biases are subjective thoughts. They're not objective data. They're ideas that we add to the facts. We judge things as good or bad, better or worse. We decide what we think should be, or we make comparisons. X is not having a hard time as I am. Now, while opinions and biases about what's happening and our reactions are common and natural, they pull us further off balance. So unproven ideas about what might happen in the future may temporarily help us feel less helpless or out of control, but we can get ahead of ourselves with frightening ideas that can just increase our upset. And biases about negative, painful feelings can be destructive and overwhelm us, and may cause us to be harder on ourselves or lose faith in our natural reactions or ability to cope, as happened to me. And perhaps we turn away from how we do feel to how we think we should feel. We tell ourselves we should be less frightened, calmer, or braver, or more upbeat. And those biases we have don't take a complete picture of ourself or our situation, and they can narrow our perspective and reduce the situation and our reactions to one way or the other. We can see things as very black or white, judging our situation or ourself as good or bad. We're strong or weak. We're fully in control. We're terrified or we're hopeful. And noticing when we're caught in our own opinions is a crucial step to balancing our thoughts and emotions. So next, go to the next slide, because next we want to observe our emotions, which is going to be extremely important because research has shown that understanding and identifying our emotions reduces their intensity. So the goal is to do our best, and again, easier said than done, to notice our feelings at this moment versus focusing on how we felt in the past, and then be aware of any biases and opinions that we're adding to how we're feeling. So let's go to the next slide. Observing our own emotions and how we're feeling, again, is easier said than done. We fight uncomfortable feelings. Sometimes our emotions have a very bad reputation. Remember, with me, I had negative biases about feelings that kept me from accepting them. And many of our feelings are actually very understandable. Our anxiety and fear makes sense if we believe there's a threat to our life. We all want to feel healthy and feel safe and secure. Our sadness is reasonable if we have to accept that we may not be able to take part in treasured activities or care for our family in the same way. Anger is a common reaction to pain, and it's understandable to be frustrated or agitated if our health compromises doing cherished activities or our relationships. The truth is, it's neither possible nor desirable to avoid our feelings. Trying to block feelings actually intensifies the emotions, and attempting to control our emotions increases the stress. Our emotions are there for a good reason, and fighting our feelings can help get in the way because our feelings can often be valuable, nonverbal messages about the safety of a situation that can motivate constructive action. Our fear tells us that it's important to escape from danger, to run from that lion, or call up our doctor. Our anxiety can be an important message to tell us to respond, to act on our worry, and to study for that test or call the doctor. Our sadness might be a useful message to reach out to others for support. Our anger can help us protect us against a physical or emotional threat, to play harder on a football field or speak up when we're not getting the help we need. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm still on the O of observing our emotions. It's important to understand that our feelings are not static. And this is a really interesting one. Physiologically, our feelings shift after 90 seconds. So that initial fear, anxiety, anger, that will only continue after 90 seconds if we hold on to it or intensify it by our thoughts, actions, or bodily sensations. So the ideal here is to open that clenched fist, to allow the emotion take in its message, and then let it go. Let that feeling to pass naturally without holding on or intensifying it with the thoughts, actions, or physical sensations. So let's move to the next slide, because lastly, the other thing we want to observe are our actions. Are we doing unhelpful things or avoiding actions that could be helpful? We don't always take care of ourselves in ways we hope to. Sometimes we do things that help us feel better in the moment and cost us in the long term. Self-soothing has a very useful place in cancer, but sometimes we can be out of balance by doing too much or too little, eating, sleeping, moving our body, or working or watching screens in an unhelpful way. We don't always communicate with others in helpful ways or constructively let them know what we need physically and emotionally. We may notice that we can talk to ourselves in self-doubting, unkind ways. Are we busy judging ourselves or saying what we should or shouldn't do or feel? Observing whether we are acting in our own self-interest can be very important because it can help us decide what changes we want to consider. So let's move to the next slide. The P of stop is to proceed mindfully by doing our best how to get to a more balanced place. And the good news is that there are lots of ways to change reactions that are not in our interest by balancing our body, our thinking, our emotions, and actions. So let me tell you some of those ways. Let's move to the next slide. How can we use our body to rebalance? Because it is possible to promote calm with changes to the body. So I've already talked about the paced breathing. Remember, that's the part where you inhale to 4 and take a longer exhale. And that it can be very helpful to settle a rapid, anxious heart rate. Muscle relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation, where we tighten our muscles, starting with our forehead, and then soften the tension till you feel like a rag doll. And what we teach people to do is go through every muscle from starting with their forehead, their eyes, their jaws, their wrists, their heart, all the way down to their feet, tightening the muscle group and then relaxing it so that they're relaxing those tight muscles. Touch and focusing on the physical touch of our senses can also ground us and minimize overthinking. I love the research that a 20-second hug along with 10 minutes of hand holding can lower our body's response to stress and anxiety. So touch is a very useful one. Okay, let's move to the next slide. How can we balance our thinking? So the D of DBT stands for dialectics. What does dialectics mean? Dialectics is really just a 50-cent word, and it means that two things that seem to be opposite can both hold important truths. Dialectics makes it clear that it's possible to feel, think, or act in more than just one way. Life is more complex than just simply good or bad. We think about that seesaw, we're not either simply emotional or restrained. We're not strong or weak. We're not in control or powerless. We're both. We balance our perspective by looking at views we may have overlooked. The news about cancer is not simply all good or all bad. A cancer diagnosis is way more complex. We're neither totally healthy or unlikely to be dying immediately. Stress has both constructive and destructive parts. Stress can be very threatening and can also challenge us. And it's the challenging side of stress that moves us to take care of ourselves, to work harder and reach out for help. In dark moments, it may be difficult to keep that opposite side of the seesaw in mind, but it's very helpful. And to remember that it's possible to both realistically face how stressful our situation is and make changes to cope in new ways. We can be both terrified and have hope. so that we rebalance. I'm making like a seesaw here by remembering we can go back and forth between light and dark. Desmond Tutu said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite the darkness, to remember that the sun always rises after a dark night. So we teach people how useful it is to have touchstones to remind us that change is always possible, that we can move from a narrow, static perspective to take that broader helicopter view that includes both the sorrow and the joy, that when we are upset and disappointed, to think about what else could be true about a situation, our reactions, and our relationships. Now, I want to be really clear about something here. I'm not simply saying, look at the bright side, think positively. I don't want to minimize feelings that make sense. Being frightened or distressed about cancer is understandable, and we don't want to give ourselves hard time about focusing on negative thoughts. So our feelings need to be validated by observing and labeling our experience before we also try to do things that are the opposite of how we are feeling. So let's go on to the next slide. Check the facts. That's a way we can balance our thoughts, because when we check the facts, it can help us minimize unnecessary upset over assumptions that may or may not be true. It ensures that we're using adequate information for our decisions, or that our ideas are coming from factual sources versus assumptions that may or may not be true. So we check the facts, we label the danger, and assess how likely it is that the threat may actually happen. That we pay attention to, we can check the facts by saying, am I taking a narrow view? What might I be overlooking? What truth am I leaving out? What am I not facing? And noticing opinions about how we're handling things that we have been adding that may or may not be based on fact. Okay, let's move to the next slide. How do we balance our emotions? The expression here is name it to tame it. What does that mean? It means to identify our emotions. Although it's not always easy to say how we're feeling, identifying our emotions helps calm ourselves. Labeling what we are feeling and what emotion has been proven in neuroscience to rebalance our nervous system. Research has shown that understanding and identifying emotions reduces their intensity. That cancer patients, and there's been research done with cancer patients who could categorize and label their emotions, showed improved coping as well as other health benefits. So up on this slide, I put common words to describe fear. In the book, we have a chapter about fear. We have a chapter about anxiety, chapter about fear and anxiety, one on sadness, and one on anger. And we put some of the common words that people use to describe it and ways that you can see these emotions in your body and your thoughts to teach you helpful ways to identify the emotions. Okay, let's keep going to the next slide. So how can we rebalance our actions that offer us help, relief from how we're feeling? One of the great ones is distractions, which can really help us when we're feeling overwhelmed and have uncomfortable thoughts. We teach people to count. Sometimes when we're sitting in a waiting room and we're completely overwhelmed, we teach people just start at 100 and start counting backwards. Sometimes we could count our breaths, inhale 1, inhale 2, or counting things like bricks on the wall. If you're sitting in a waiting room, start counting how many bricks are on that wall right there. Labeling is also useful. just as naming works to tame emotions. When you're feeling overwhelmed, a good trick is to ground yourself by simply identifying what you see in front of you, to get your thoughts focused on, I see People magazine on the coffee table. That lady has on green shoes. There's 4 magazines over there. There's a coffee cup. Soothing sensations can also help manage physical and emotional agitation. What tastes, smells, sounds are very soothing to you. We can also balance the painful parts of life with actions that evoke opposite feelings. Pleasurable, funny events. While laughing can seem out of place, laughter is best medicine. And there's research that humor can make grief bearable, boost mood, diminish pain. And laughing has been shown to improve long-term coping. Now, I'm not suggesting that you simply act positive and look at the bright side. First, you need to validate the understandable fear and upset. But balancing actions means to consider the opposite of what you're doing, and they can calm us down. Developing mastery can rebalance helplessness and may help you feel more competent. Contributing rebalances feelings, and doing something for somebody else can be a way of feeling active instead of feeling helpless. And gratitude. And while it can be difficult when we've lost so much to appreciate the positive, valuable parts of life, it can be challenging to do that. Research shows that can be worthwhile. That patients that made a list of 5 things that they were grateful for were found to be significantly happier than those that they showed fewer health problems than patients that only focused on hassles. Self-talk is a common and pervasive part of life with cancer is our self-doubt, and we can blame ourselves for things that are out of our control. And self-criticism can be a habit, but research has shown that when we have faith in our ability to do so, and we talk to ourselves and with balancing that critical self-talk by being appreciative of what we're doing and of how we're handling ourselves and talking to ourselves in a kind and reassuring way. I'm sorry this is so difficult. Other people are having difficulty just like me. And there's a lot of research that has shown that's helpful. So the last 2 parts I want to talk about are about relationship concerns and how to talk to loved ones, colleagues, doctors, and also our medical providers. And we use an acronym that we call DEAR when we have to talk to someone when it's difficult. The D stands for describe, just saying the facts, so that we might say to a loved one, when I say how scared I am, and you say, I'll be fine, that doesn't always feel so great for me. Or to a colleague, we might say, people have stopped asking for my input. Or we might describe to our medical provider, just the facts. Our last appointment was 15 minutes, and I didn't have enough time to express and ask my questions. The E is to express. Nobody knows how you're feeling and can be a mind reader. So we want to say, if to our medical provider, that didn't give me enough time and I felt upset, or to our loved one who is so busy reassuring ourselves, it makes me feel not understood. The A of DEAR is to ask for what we want. I'd love for you to be more sensitive in your wording, or use a more emotional tone, or give me more time or communication. And the R is to reinforce. I feel like I could work with you in a better way, or I would feel better, more understood if I do that. Lastly, and I'm kind of rushing to give us some time, and this last slide is about living meaningfully. Because in challenging times, many of us want to reconsider what's most meaningful to us. And issues of faith and spirituality may be more central as we look for a connection to something larger, to feel less separate and alone, or understand a confusing world. What we do in this unit is that we help people focus on what matters to them and what really guides them, to help them be more likely to cherish the people that really understand them, and take them through to recognize the places that might offer them more solace, or the traditions that offer them a sense of hope and belonging, or treasure activities that give them a sense of purpose. And remind people that spirituality can be expressed in many different ways. For some of us, it's in religion. And some of us, it's with the wonders of science or bringing in nature. And secular readings and meditations can also be ways to express what's in our own heart. I'm going to stop here because I'm going way over time and give you a chance to ask any kind of questions that you have, or reactions or concerns.